Looks like it's a minute after 7 here. So we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks everybody for joining in this evening for our webinar, our first webinar of 2025. Excited about this one with a focus on solar grazing and opportunities for the sheep industry to grow numbers and work with the solar industry to provide vegetation management services on their solar sites. And so we've got a great lineup of speakers this evening. And looking forward to hear what they have to say. Just a few housekeeping things before we get started. I'll quickly introduce myself. I'm Andrew Weaver. I'm the small ruminant specialist here at NC State and serve a teaching and extension role here with the university and work with our small ruminant program team, extension group to put on these webinar series and have had quite a bit of interest and really encouraging to see all the growth in small ruminants across this part of the country and the interest that you all have in joining in and sharing your evening with us. These webinars are recorded and will be available afterwards. I'll get them. It might take me a week or two, but I'll get them posted. And these will be available to review and watch afterwards. So if you've got some friends, family that aren't able to join tonight, they'll still be able to review this webinar and watch it, and we'll share a link for that here in the coming weeks. And so along with that, to get to know everyone and kind of know where everyone's from, if you don't mind sharing in the chat your location, where you're joining us from. It's always fun to see the counties and the states where everyone is located. So if you don't mind just typing that in the chat, that would be great. If you have any questions as the webinar goes on this evening, you can share that in the chat as well. We'll try to get back to those questions at the end, or you can save your questions till the end and unmute yourself and ask them in person. So we'll save all the questions till the end just to keep things flowing. We do ask that you would please mute yourself and turn your videos off for the duration of the webinar, and especially while our presenters are sharing, just to make sure everyone keeps good connection and good service while we go through the program this evening. And that's about all I have for announcements. And so we'll go ahead and turn things over to our first speakers. So we have with us Camren Maierle. Dr. Maierle is the Director of Sustainability Programs for the American Land Board, has been working with sheep producers across the country and helping them understand solar grazing and develop some best management practices and some training programs related to solar grazing. And so he put on hosted several schools last year, and he might mention in his presentation has some exciting schools upcoming in 2025. And so hopefully this will be a good intro to solar grazing. And then he might share some of the opportunities for continuing education, in-person trainings as we move into the new year. So with that, Cam, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Perfect. And just confirming you can hear me and you can see my slides.
Yes, sounds
Perfect.
good.
All right. Well, definitely appreciate the invite to sit in front of you virtually. And usually giving these presentations like to be pretty interactive, but we'll keep that at bay. As Andrew had mentioned, if you've got questions, write them down, put them in the chat, hold on to them. Would be excited to answer those at the end. But we're really just going to talk here to kick things off on just introductory stuff and what opportunities exist specifically for the sheep industry and when we're looking at solar grazing. So the big picture item that we've really been kind of focusing on and honing in on is promoting mutualistic relationships. How do we take an industry that is not agriculture and pair it with the sheep industry so that both can benefit in that style of relationship? So if you're not familiar with the American Land Board, that is who I'm employed by, their Director of Sustainability. And I usually like to ask this question if we're in a classroom, who's heard of American Land Board? And I'm always surprised that not a lot of people know that when they take those lambs to the auction, there is a checkoff, just like the beef checkoff, the pork checkoff, that takes funds from there and markets your American lamb to American consumers. And so the second part of that question is who's seen the industry or producer facing side of that organization, their website. And that's what's up here. Link is there at the bottom, just landboard.com. And I think, in my opinion, it's one of the industry's best kept secrets because, in terms of resources, a lot of opportunity on here for educational pieces. They've got some management best practice pieces that, again, are getting kind of revitalized and getting those turned back out with some new topics. But that's where your checkoff dollars are going. So certainly take advantage of it and tap into it. We think about solar development, depending on where you're coming from, and it's becoming more, I guess, just well known that these are popping up everywhere. It used to be probably 10 years ago. And if you're in North Carolina, you guys still had development 10 years ago. But where I'm located at in central Ohio, it was always something that was, oh, we have winter. It's white outside right now. Not sunny enough, not hot enough. We'll never see the expansion of solar energy this far north. And just like everything else, technology improves and really energy demand is increasing. When we think about what the demand is, there's a nationwide demand for energy. Where I'm located at here in central Ohio, probably feeling it as massive that demand is anywhere else in the country. The numbers for Columbus and surrounding suburbs by 2028, 2030 will be using or needing to use more electricity than New York City, which is a crazy, crazy thing for me to wrap my head around. I'm sure when you get down there in North Carolina around the Research Triangle, probably a very similar story in what's needed and what the demand is. What's driving this? If any of you are on social media or just hop on the internet, period, that data is being collected, whether you like it or not. And to store data, it takes a lot of electricity. And so companies that are pushing this data collection and this wave of computing, Meta, Amazon, Verizon's, they also take a stance on being more positive in their thinking towards green energy or clean energy. And so it kind of makes sense why we're seeing a boom of not only energy increase, but that green energy push. The value of capturing sunlight. This was presented. Ohio Farm Bureau had a piece here in Western Ohio. Per acre of land, the amount of sunlight that could be captured, if we could collect 100%, about $220,000 annually is how much energy is sitting there. Now, panels are not capable of collecting 100% of the sun, but it really puts it into perspective when you look at the land and the acreage lease and what money is going into this, and then you see what's available in terms of capturing sunlight and converting it into a usable form of energy. Gives you some idea of why that's happening. When we think about growth in the US and how it's trending, the biggest thing I want you to take away from this, the key at the bottom. So residential solar, when we're thinking rooftop, again, if you're on social media, you probably get some ads on, installing solar for free. At least here where I'm at, that's the big thing is we'll pay you to put panels on your house. Commercial solar, so rooftop in manufacturing or parking lots, community scale, what I would term, and I've talked to another couple of people, 100 acres or less. When you get into North Carolina, that community scale solar tends to be right around that 30-acre mark, and then utility scale solar. So anything above, in my opinion, 100 acres, you could probably even say in a North Carolina setting above that 30-acre allotment of panels. Again, one thing that helps when we're booming with anything, cost of production. So as the increased demand for installation has gone up, the cost of installation has gone down. And so that's assisting with the boom. One of the big things that goes into this is technology. We look at if you've got your phone right next to you, or maybe you're watching on an iPad. Did that exist 20 years ago? And the answer is no. And if it did, it wasn't the size that it is, or able to perform in the way that it does today. And so as that continues to increase, it's going to be more affordable to install even in the future. Just some terminology or some things to think about and keep with you. We talk about megawatts a lot of times in the solar side of things. Uh, that number gets thrown around a lot, even there, as we were talking before everybody came in, just on what installation looks like. Oh, it's a 10 megawatt. Oh, it's an 80 megawatt site. And I think we forget that's a million watts of energy in there. It's a big number. And when we're thinking about how many megawatts, what the footprint of that looks like, it's about 6 acres. That number today is probably right around 5.5. And again, with technology, plan for that number to decrease. So every 1 megawatt may only take 4 acres of solar. And I don't know that I don't have that data to tell you by what year it comes down. So wanted to share just North Carolina spotlight. What's interesting to me is North Carolina ranks fourth in their total installed capacity. It's because as a state, you guys have been doing this for a long time, and it's also fun when we do these workshops. We're down in North Carolina to see some of that older technology where it's at today, and then what they're producing and how far that's come in a 10-year span. But there's a lot of solar around. That increased development is going to continue right about average, ranking 26th in the next 5-year capacity of what's being installed. And really the projections, what they're showing and the numbers that I've seen, a lot of those sites are going to be larger, more utility scale in nature. So that graphic comes from the Solar Energy Industries Association. It's a trade organization for solar energy. And they also have this, I forget what they call this. It's a map of oh, it's escaping me now. But these are just solar installations that are solar arrays that are being installed, have already been installed, or are under construction. And so just looking at where those kind of fit in the US, it's not really that surprising when we think about energy usage and demand for electricity. What I think is interesting is when we start to look at our sheep industry and where that's been, where it's going, and how do we address meeting the demand for vegetation management in these environments. So this is a map of population by state. And so dark blue indicating more sheep. This is every 1,000 head. So we look at Texas, for example, 655,000 head of sheep and lamb numbers in there. When we're looking at just what makes up the majority of our sheep industry, it is that Western range type environment. Those fine wool type ewes that we see going into our traditional market is making up the lion's share of our industry. I do think it's important to look at where we're seeing growth, and we're getting ready. A couple of us on here getting ready to go out to our annual sheep industry meeting, and I remember the first time that I attended an ASI meeting and was kind of surprised how doom and gloom it was, and part of that was just being naive on my side of it. But they're experiencing losses continually every year. We're seeing this trend in a reduction of sheep inventory in our states that really have carried the bulk of our industry, and trying to find the silver lining in that. And again, maybe it's because I've spent all of my life east of the Mississippi. In the east, we are growing and our inventory is coming up. That's an exciting thing. Obviously, we hope that would trend for all 50 states from a sheep industry standpoint. The other aspect of this that is somewhat concerning, or if we had to kind of speculate, the southeastern states that we really don't have a good grasp on inventory. Uh, a lot of the small ruminant specialists, a lot of the extension individuals will tell you they're seeing an increase in sheep production in those states as well, from a variety of reasons. But this is just something when we think about solar installation and new projects and where can we pair these things together. We are seeing growth in the east. We're seeing uh, solar installed in the east, Texas. And it'll be interesting, kind of those state by state cases as the demand or opportunity grows. Does our sheep industry grow alongside uh, the energy industry? So agrivoltaics, just gonna, again, this is gonna be pretty quick to give you the background, but agrivoltaics, if you're not familiar with that terminology, it pairs solar with agriculture, creating energy and providing, oh my screen's over that, providing space for crops, grazing, and native habitats. And for me, the thing that we're going to focus on is the grazing aspect of it. And I don't want you to walk away and say, "Oh man, the guy from American Land Board does not like butterflies or crops." It's not the case, but we're talking about sheep and grazing, and of the opinion that all of those things can come together with proper site design, creating opportunity for a lot of different things. One of the greatest hurdles to sheep producers, specifically in the eastern United States, I would argue nationwide, access to grazable acres. And the nationwide aspect of it, we start to talk about that public land that our range operators are utilizing and have built operations around that scenario. You start to talk about pulling that away, and it becomes very confrontational. It's a big issue. And so having access where we can put sheep is our greatest hurdle, one of our greatest challenges. Plenty of other challenges that go along separate from that, go along with that. Uh, but that's our big hurdle. And one of the things that solar grazing, vegetation management provides is that access to acreage that we can graze. So what's the goal of a solar panel? Collect sunlight. I'm not an electrical engineer. You're not going to hear the nuts and bolts of how we collect that energy and what it means. But when we think about uh, the enemy, or something that's a negative to a solar site, shade. And we've got a picture here, a situation that doesn't look real fun to manage. Company's probably not happy. Whoever has to go in and weed eat all of that thistle that's up under that panel, probably not real happy. I would really like to manage that early, and I personally would really like to manage it with sheep, so we don't have a situation that we see in the picture. That being said, this is probably years of mismanagement to end up with the species that we see, to the level that we see. We need to remember vegetation management is a vital part of the solar development planning. Companies understand this is an expense that they're going to have not only in year one, but in year 30, year 40, however long that site is installed. It's long term. It's also annual. Our grass does not grow in year one, year two, and then it's good for the remaining 28 years. And so it really, we think about a 30-year lifespan on solar. For me, when I look at it, I'm hoping that it's an entire career's length of time, which gives me some hope that there is some sustainable attributes to this from a business model standpoint. So why grazing? Why sheep? You can read those bullet points. The biggest one on the why sheep, they fit. Frankly, it is an easy form of agrivoltaics. There is PR associated with it. We look at, and I sat on the fence for a very long time with solar arrays and putting those on what we'd call prime farmland. If you ever see a negative post about solar, I know where you guys are at in North Carolina, a lot of those sites are not going on to what was pre-existing farmland, maybe some lumber production, some timber production. But where I'm at here in the Midwest, a lot of corn, a lot of bean ground that's coming out, row crop agriculture. It's coming out to install ground that's now producing or capturing energy. And if I can keep livestock on there, I'm of the opinion that we're continuing to farm that acreage, and it's really a win-win. We think about some conservative estimates. This is probably the biggest question. How many ewes is it going to take? 3 to 5 ewes per acre. It really depends region, forage availability, uh, just type of forage. Is it good stuff like we have in the picture? Is it all of the thistle that I just had a couple slides ago? How much money is there to be made in this? Um, Certainly enough, I'm of the opinion, certainly enough to establish a business that focuses solely on vegetation management. Um, 300 to 500 per acre range. What you have to remember is this price point is already established by the company to manage vegetation. Your competitor in this business is not the sheep producer down the road. It's the mowing company that's coming in and uh, leaving. And so this is a paid service. You are not paying for the grass. They are paying you to manage the grass, which brings a whole host of challenges. We as people in agriculture, sheep producers, shepherds, maybe don't like to be told what to do with our sheep at all, or just how we're managing that site. You're dealing with other people now, and it's different than operating on the home farm. So when we think about just some industry growth, I wanted to throw a quick example. Of course, this is math, and so the numbers are going to work out perfectly. But what in the early stages of this, and what gets you excited is just seeing some of the opportunity for revenue coming from vegetation management on these solar sites. 500-acre site, that would be a fairly large site, especially for North Carolina. Maybe not large in the future. But for use to the acre, we'll use those averages from those slides previous, and 350 an acre. Again, average price on that what was listed. We think about what those ewes are going to produce. 150% lamb crop, 3,000 lambs, almost 250,000 pounds of lamb going to that American consumer. And that's at a pretty lightweight carcass, probably going into the ethnic market or into a feedlot to then be sold as a traditional product down the road. When we look at the grazing service alone, $175,000 on that 500-acre site. The reason I get excited about that $175,000 mark is, yes, I'm of the opinion you could take these 2,000 ewes if you had the space and generate that $408,000 in a good year with prices that never change. And I can make a living. I'd like to think I can make a living off of that, even with my input costs. What that grazing service allows is the flexibility in that bad year. I don't necessarily have to sell off sheep to pay the bills. Can I afford labor now to bring into the operation? And so when we think about the opportunity for growth and what that dollar amount for the grazing service means, creates a lot of opportunity for us as shepherds to get in and do a job for somebody else and also raise sheep, probably more at a full-time scale. So we think the business model, a lot of options in terms of bringing in ewes. You operate sheep on this acreage just like you would at home, maybe tweak it a little bit. But my ewes are out there 365 days. We lamb on site, we wean, maybe we graze lambs on site before we market them. The lamb feeder option. Do I bring in ewe lambs for somebody back around during the grazing season and then send them down the road? There's certainly going to be challenges with all of these. You know, talk to people that you talk about lambing on site out on pasture, and it's a foreign concept and absolutely terrifying to them, and that's okay. Maybe that's not the right fit for them. Same thing. Had a conversation with Woody Lane out, gentleman focusing on grazing out west, and been a lot of discussion. Instead of growing our state inventory or inventories here in the east, let's just bring in lambs from western states and ask them to graze for the grazing season and ship them out. And his comment, which I appreciated after the fact, was, well, that's a great idea because you'll save on trucking when you're done grazing. And in my mind, I'm like, oh, how are you going to save on trucking this? And because they're going to be larger, can fit fewer lambs per trailer. And he's like, well, you know, because of all the parasites in the east and you know, the heat and trucking loss, you'll end up with way fewer sheep than what you started with. So again, it's just something we need to be considerate of. We can't just throw sheep out. Um, we have to be managers in this situation, and a lot of challenges to look at and try to fix and figure out. Then the hybrid model, mowing and grazing. Certainly look at mowing as a tool. When we talk to companies that are already planning on having projects mowed, we can show them that, hey, we are equipped with the mowing equipment. Um, it will be managed one way or another. We would like to we would like sheep to do the majority of that work, but if we end up with significant rainfall, we can manage that vegetation so they don't experience shading. So as we wrap up, just want you to remember that as an industry, we're importing 60 to 70% of our product that's consumed domestically. And for anybody that, I'm not saying it's as easy as just producing more sheep and replacing it, there will be challenges. But for anybody that says, oh, well, this is going to tank my check at the sale barn, so why do we need to grow? This number, 60 to 70%, will go up if we don't increase our domestic production. Lamb consumption is going up. And I would love to see, I think as an industry, we would love to see more American product in front of American consumers. With that, Andrew had mentioned some trainings. We do offer an ASGA certified workshop. We did host one in North Carolina with Johnny Rogers, who's going to talk here in a little bit, looking at his site and how he manages sheep under panel. And if you're not an ASGA member, American Solar Grazing Association, highly recommend it. It's been really fun to collaborate from Land Board to ASGA to ASI, collaborate and really work to make those connections so that we can better serve producers that want to grow the industry and want to pursue this as a business model in the future. So with that, happy to take any questions, whether tonight at the end or get a phone number, email, reach out if you have anything, and we'll pass it on to the next speaker.
Yeah, thanks, Cam. And like I said at the beginning, we'll save the questions for the end, just so we can keep on schedule here with the different speakers. But I see a few have come in the chat, and feel free to, if you have any questions, type them in there, and we will certainly get back to them at the end. Our next speaker, Stephen Brown, excited to have him with us. And actually, that was a connection made through one of these American Land Board grazing schools. And so one of the things I really enjoyed about those schools were the networking opportunities and bringing industry professionals together with grazers and extension folks. And it was a really, really fun few days. So I encourage you, if you have the opportunity to attend one of those schools in 2025, it's a great opportunity. So Stephen, for the last 10 years, has been working in the energy industry, and for the last 4 years has been involved in the greenfield solar and battery projects. He's got a bachelor's and a master's in civil engineering from UNC Charlotte, and is an active professional engineer in North Carolina. So really excited to have him with us to kind of give us some perspective from the solar industry standpoint on solar grazing and opportunities for sheep and vegetation management. So I'll turn the floor over to you.
Hey, thanks, Andrew, and thanks, Cameron. Great presentation. Everybody just Bear with me, I'll share my screen. All right, can you see that?
Yes, looks great.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so yes, I'm Stephen Brown. I've been in the energy industry for 10 years. The last five or so has been focused solely on renewables. And I'm going to talk to you today, kind of from my perspective, um, as a developer, engineer, owner, operator of solar grazing and why it matters. And I've got just a few quick slides I want to walk through to kind of get to the point. First, I just want to cover quickly like what we're looking at. So I'll show a picture and talk about basics of solar and how it works, and should just take about a minute or two. And then where is the U.S. solar industry going? Kind of at the larger scale, and then kind of at the more site level, and then why solar grazing can be important for solar owners, so such as folks like me or in my side of the industry, and then how I think that ranchers and grazers can get involved, and maybe the people or strategies that you can use to get your foot in the door and start developing those relationships. And before I get deep into it, I just want to reiterate that all these opinions are my own and may not reflect the positions of my current or past employers. So keep that in mind. All right. So quickly, I'm going to use some terminology probably through the next parts of the presentation. I just want to kind of visually show it to folks who may not be super familiar with solar and the technology. So whenever I say a panel or a module, if you see on your screen to the top left, that black grid in a rectangle, those are solar panels or solar modules. That's what's really collecting the sun's energy and then transitioning that into electricity current that we can use. Those panels are mounted on a tube structure. If you see that tube that's running through the middle, that's what is called a tracker. So most solar facilities will be built today on what's called a single axis tracker, which means it can rotate in the morning through midday and then in the evening following the path of the sun. And so generally these solar sites are built in a north-south orientation, and then that tracker turns from east in the morning to west in the evening, really trying to maximize the amount of sun that's hitting those panels. There at the end of the row, you'll see a pile that's just a steel I-beam. Most solar panels these days, until you get up north in maybe Michigan and where you have some kind of major frost or glacial soils, are going to be built on these I-beams. And there's basically a post driver that comes in and drives these down, and this tracker gets mounted onto these posts. And at the end of the row, the box that the gentleman's kind of working the wires into, that's a combiner box. So each one of these panels is kind of connected together and then connected into this combiner box where it kind of consolidates those connections. From this place, just as a high level, it goes to an inverter that converts the DC energy that's being produced by the panel into AC energy. So that's kind of what comes out of your plug at your house, for example. Then there's a medium voltage transformer that's connected to the inverter that steps up the voltage, allows us to kind of push that energy to a little bit further distance more efficiently. And then before we get to the grid, we have to get usually to an even higher voltage. So there's a large transformer in a substation that's surrounded by fencing with barbed wire, a lot of kind of steel in the air type of thing. If you've seen the substations, if you've driven by them, you'd recognize them. But it goes to a large high voltage transformer and then out to the transmission grid, onto the transmission towers that you see crisscrossing all over the country. So hope that's helpful. But so where is the solar energy industry going in the U.S.? And Camren touched on this very well, but it's growing, right? A lot more acres are going to be added in solar by 2050. It's going to happen. Is it going to be 4 million acres or 10 million acres or somewhere in between? I don't know, but it's going to be a lot. And what's also happening is solar is getting bigger. So 15 years ago, a 5-acre solar site was pretty standard. Today, a 500-acre solar site is pretty standard. So these things are growing in size for each individual projects, and there's a lot more of them coming. And the reason for that is the technology is getting better, and also it's just taking longer and more money to get these projects plugged in. So you have to spread those costs over a bigger project. And interestingly enough, all these projects are going to be put somewhere, and about 80% of those will likely be put on farmland, according to the American Farmland Trust. So that means these lands, these solar sites, generally will have good soils at least before construction. From a technology perspective, what are we thinking is going to happen? We're going to get larger size panels. So we're going to get 8-foot by 4-foot rectangles, bigger than your refrigerator at home, that we're going to be hanging on these trackers. We're going to have terrain following trackers. So we're going to be able to kind of mount these undulating tubes at very steep slopes. So that has some construction and operational impacts, as you can imagine. They're currently researching semi-autonomous installations, so constructing sections of the tracker with the module already installed in a mini factory on site, and having robot guided carts roll them out to the field and lift them into place. So it's amazing what can be done these days in that respect. And then drones. So drones have been used in solar for a few years now to do kind of end inspections, but I think that we're going to see a lot more drone use, especially as it relates to vegetation management and kind of ongoing operational inspections to try to optimize the performance of the plants, and really kind of optimize the folks that you send out to the field to perform the work or repairs. Okay, so my opinion is solar grazing can be important for solar owners, and I just want to walk you through very quickly kind of the development process. So developing a solar project, at least, reminds me of feeding my kid dinner, and I'm sure some of you out there can relate. But most nights, I put a plate out for her with some meat and potatoes, a vegetable and fruit. And it looks good, and it's probably really nutritious. Well, she may take one bite of the chicken, eat all the rice, ask for applesauce instead of the blueberries, and not touch the veggies or feed them to the dog. And if I turn my head, she already went and put a cookie on her plate for dessert. So at the end, I'm not sure like what plate I put together or what she even ate. And that's kind of like building a solar project. You start out with a perfect vision of what you want to do, and then the landowners have their requirements to sign them up to the lease, and then the town comes with their demands to give you a permit. And then inflation happens, and the engineers have to cut capital costs. So they lower the panels, they do above ground cable trays, maybe the grading isn't exactly perfect. And then when it finally goes to construction, you have a contractor that's under a time and cost constraint. They strip the soil, they compact it with their machinery, zigzagging all across the field, and then they put down a DOT mixed seed, whichever will establish the quickest, and then they leave. And then that site gets handed to operations, and operations ends up with a project that looks very different from the one that we dreamt up 5 or 6 years prior, when the site was farmland. And it's unfortunate because in that time, in operations period, the budgets are the tightest, and you have the most rigidity of what you can do to make the project better. Just to give you a peek behind the curtain, in my experience, for operations side, they will typically budget $75 to $100 per acre per mow. I'd estimate in North Carolina, we're probably looking at 3 to 5 mows a year, just depending on where you are in the state and how much rain you get. They had to deal with labor and fuel costs that are impacted by inflation, higher prices certainly than in the past. And then like the big thing for me is veg management. An operating solar site may be 30 to 50% of the total operator's annual budget. That's including both preventative and corrective maintenance. So at the end of the day, it's a big chunk of the budget. So I see that as a big opportunity. When we get to the end and we as solar owners, how can we make this better? How can we get more value from the project when it's already built? I believe solar grazing is an excellent tool to consider as we go forward with the projects that we have. So how can ranchers or grazers get involved? I think first, before you're reaching out, or maybe while you're reaching out, refine your business model. So we want to see turnkey services. We want to make sure that you've got a decent insurance coverage. Please have contract acumen or have legal support that can help you review a contract. I don't want to see you sign up for something that's going to negatively impact you in the long run. I'd like to see as an engineer just the planning behind the grazing and the mowing. So, what's your rotational plan? How often do you think you'll mow? What herbicides might you have to use if you spray? Like, what is the rest time between applications? That sort of thing. I think is very good, and it shows your expertise to folks in the utility industry that really, really value that planning and systemic mindset. So I think if you can bring those to the table, you'll have a lot of success when you are able to make contact. And how you make contact can be different from company to company, but I would say it's easiest before construction. So if you're in an area and you hear that developers are signing up leases from folks around you, get the contact of the developer and call them and say, hey, I've got some sheep and I'm looking to graze, and I hear you're looking to build a solar site. That solar site may be 4, 5, 6 years out, but getting in contact while they're developing the site so they can plan for that grazing is invaluable. And plus, you'll develop a relationship. They may have other projects in the area you could support. So that's number one. I would say if you see a solar site being built during construction, try to figure out who's building it. Usually there'll be signs. Maybe you could stop in at the construction gate and try to ask. I'm always the type of person that will just stop and ask and try to get a contact any way I can. But you can try to get a contact of a construction manager or project manager at the site. Or if you know who's building it, go on LinkedIn if you're not on it already and look for people who are with that company, but their title is buyer or sourcing specialist or procurement. Those are supply chain people, and those are the people who write the contracts. And so it's really good to get in front of those folks or make contact with those folks because they're looking for any savings that they can get. So that's one another area. And then the other would be like during operations. So if there's technicians at the site, in your community, you may know folks that are technicians for a utility or a solar site. Same way with sourcing specialists during operations. You can go on LinkedIn. Environmental compliance people will be going in and out of the site, so flagging some of those folks down. I will say too, North Carolina has some great conferences. The Southeast Renewable Energy Conference, for example, many utilities, many IPPs, many co-ops attend those conferences. A lot of consultants attend those conferences too. So networking at those conferences could lead you to an opportunity. The last thing I'll say is, the last two things: be prepared for a long courtship. Solar energy owners typically don't move fast. Operations leadership are very risk averse for good reason. So just be prepared to be persistent, and please follow up, follow up, follow up. Life gets in the way. We get busy and people need reminding. And I'll just speak for myself. I do not take it personally if you continue to pester me because, maybe I forgot to call you back. I want to talk to grazers in our area, and I want to help the projects that I have responsibility over be better and be more competitive. So if in the future any of you all have questions or want to contact me, my personal email and personal phone are on the slide, and I'd be happy to talk with you and meet you and network with you. So with that, I'll hand it back to Andrew for the next speaker. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. That was great. Really appreciate it. And we'll move on to our last speaker of the evening. We have Johnny Rogers with us, and Johnny's the coordinator for the Amazing Grazing program here at NC State. But his other job is running Rogers Cattle Company with his wife Sharon, and they've gotten involved in solar grazing and been doing so for a number of years now. And so he's going to speak to a little bit of his experiences with grazing sheep on solar in North Carolina. So I'll turn the floor over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew, and really enjoyed our other speakers, and it's a pleasure to be on here with you tonight. I am going to turn off my video. I live in a very rural place, so we don't have very good internet, so trying to preserve that as best we can. And let me move some of this. Well, shucks. What did I just do? Somehow I've lost my, help me out here, Andrew. Somehow I lost my,
I can see your slide.
okay, I can't.
Um,
Hold on just a second. Let me, here
see
we
if we
go.
can
There you
reshare
go.
it.
Now I think I'm back now. All right, I'm back now, I believe. Okay.
I see your little face icon, but I don't see your
Oh,
screen anymore.
huh. All right. Let's see. Let me go back to share. Let's try this again. How about now?
Okay, yep. It's there. Yep, I can see it
Okay,
now.
there we
There
go.
you go.
All right. I'm not
It's
going
up.
to mess around with that anymore. So I was trying to get that out of my way, but I believe I won't. So anyway, yeah, it's a pleasure to be here to share some of the experiences that Sharon and I have had grazing solar farms. And so we'll just jump right into it. This is Sharon and myself here. Just a little bit about Rogers Cattle Company. Obviously, we're cattle folks by the name of our operation, and we've operated on pretty much 100% leased land up until a couple of years ago. We have actually bought a small farm in a neighboring county and busy turning that into a grass farm. And you can see we've had a lot of different enterprises through the years, and now it's kind of settled in on ewes and lambs and cattle, and we do a little bit of pasture-raised meats. And I share that with you a little bit just because we're all shaped by our experiences, right? I mean, it's kind of what develops our the way we do things. So I just always like to share a little bit about what we've kind of done, and that way you can kind of see this and say, okay, this guy has raised free range turkeys. That tells me a little bit about that guy. So anyway, this is the farm that we moved to and leased. I guess that was in 2001. So we've been here quite a while. Now, when we first moved there, we leased the land, and we moved into that little house that's there where that blue arrow is. Now, this solar farm down here at the bottom center of the screen, that was not there in 2001. That came along much later. So you can see it's a nice, a pretty good sized farm. For this part of North Carolina, it's about 300 acres of pasture. And we were thrilled to have a very stable relationship with our landlord. And along about 2000, I think it was 2015, he came along and built the first solar farm here. And then he actually built another one that I'll show you an updated photo here on the slide. But I share this with you to kind of just, folks ask me sometimes, they say, well, how did you get started solar grazing? I said, well, it's kind of destiny, if anything else, right? I mean, it kind of happened to me. I mean, we already had sheep and cattle. Sheep were kind of the preferred animal to graze these solar farms, and literally they built a solar farm, not quite in my backyard, but pretty much in my backyard. So, and back to what Stephen said, their relationships were very important here. Obviously, we had a good relationship with our landlord, and as he was negotiating the lease on this first solar site, and really the second one as well, he introduced me to the company, and helped us kind of get started solar grazing again. We already had sheep at that point in time. So this kind of shows you a little bit about the RCC solar grazing operations. If you look here in the middle of the screen, Wagstaff 1, that would be that first solar site there. That would be the second one on that farm, the Woodsdale Solar Farm. And then if you kind of move up to the top, what that be, top right-hand corner of the screen, you can see another solar site, Roxborough, and that says South Boston Solar Farm, surely Boston Solar Farm. So you can see those are community size or scale, solar sites, anywhere from 15 acres would be the kind of the smallest one there at Woodsdale. And probably the larger one would be the Boston Farm. I think it's almost getting up toward 50 acres. So anyway, again, I put this in here for a reason to share with you that that's about 8 miles, between where we live, and some of the solar sites are literally really close to where we live. And then the furthest ones away at this point are just about 8 miles, as the road runs. So, we're able to move equipment around. We're able to haul water if we need to, for the sheep, moving sheep back and forth. We moved some sheep today out of a solar site. So the logistics of how all this kind of works, I think, comes into play about how attractive, it might be. And you need to evaluate that, how far can you go, from your home base. And a lot of that would be dictated by how large the solar site is. I would go a lot further for a 1,000-acre solar farm than I would for a 30-acre solar farm. And I think, there's a lot more sheep at that 1,000-acre solar farm to pay for the trip and all the things associated with production there. I think if you, we saw this picture here before. I've got the same one, actually the top right picture. It's what we don't want. So if you look at, kind of what solar farm owner benefits, if we have a relationship with a grazer, hopefully they get good vegetation control. And this was actually the bottom picture there in the center. That was a solar farm that we were grazing, and we had just started grazing. And I want to point that out there. We just started grazing it, and I should have showed you the after picture. The ewes did a nice job knocking that down. So, I think one of our speakers said, shading is what we don't want. We also don't want vegetation touching the underneath side of the panels as well. I think it lowers the efficiency of which they harvest electricity, at least what I've been told. So it is a sustainable management system, hopefully, or maintenance system. And the local first responder and the positive story can be a big deal there, especially during the planning process. And here's a couple of pictures of something that I found at one of our solar sites one day after an ice storm. And I took some pictures of that, texted it to our contact of the solar company, and they handled it from there. We didn't have any sheep in there at the time, but we did go, and check on it as well. Here's something else we found. We talked about those I-beams that Stephen mentioned there. Well, if they get enough ice and snow on them, they will bend apparently and just kind of tilt forward. So again, took some pictures of that, gave them the location, the row that it was on, and they came in and fixed that up for us. So again, it's more than just the vegetative management. We need to be a full service provider and a good team player as we work with our solar company partners. What do we get as sheep farmers? Again, I think Cam mentioned that quite a bit. Pasture is a hard to get, hard to find, especially good sheep pasture that has a good fence that would, keep our sheep in, keep our guard dogs in, and maybe slow coyotes down, on their entrance into our property. Free grass. I left that in here because when we first started grazing, we were actually grazing for free grass. And it kind of made sense on that first solar site because literally they built a gate on the backside of that solar farm. We could walk sheep in, we could walk them out. We had water line that we tapped into there to provide water. So it kind of made sense, and they did all the mowing. And that worked out pretty good until one day I was getting ready to turn my sheep in there. I had some beautiful grass, about 8 inches tall. And I could hear it from my house one morning. I heard a lawnmower mowing, and you kind of know what happened there. And they mowed all my beautiful grass down. And so again, that was a lesson in communication with our industry partners there. Shelter and shade, the sheep, they kind of appreciate. Sheep really don't like to be wet. So they appreciate the little barns that are out there that provide them some shelter, and they provide nice shade during the summertime. Being paid to graze, that's really nice. And as Cam pointed out, it can help you build a more sustainable business over time when you factor that in and compare that to just a sheep enterprise by itself. Yeah, remember we talked about the secure perimeter fence. Make sure you check first. That's the first thing you need to do before you put sheep in there, probably before you even agree to graze the site or to manage the vegetation in the site. Make sure you can fix things like that without any problem, but that's certainly looks like a coyote superhighway there if we don't do something about that. Most important nutrient to any animal, any of our livestock would be water. What are you going to do about that? These solar sites are not necessarily, to this point, I should say, have not been built to be grazing sites. I think Stephen pointed that out, about some of the seed mixes that they use. It just doesn't lead to high quality forages that we'd kind of like to have available. Same with water. Some of these larger sites, I know a lot of the companies and farmers are partnering and digging wells, and it makes sense on a larger site. It just doesn't make sense on having a well on every 30-acre site. It's just that's a major expense. Maybe tying into some of the county and city water supplies, but that too, I think, would probably be cost prohibitive. So what do? The good news is, the silver lining here is that sheep just do not drink a lot of water. Yes, they need water, but it's not that bad to haul water to sheep. If you remember my context here, I'm pretty close by. Now, if I was hauling at 30 miles, yeah, that probably wouldn't be much fun. And could you, work out something in the neighborhood close by, if you do have a solar farm a little further away from your headquarters and your home base, could you work out something there locally to buy some water, use some water somehow? Might work. I put this in here. This was that original solar farm that we built. This was our 2016. We used some temporary electric fence, and you can see we subdivided that. The blue circles would be the water sources that we quick connect couplers that we put strategically. We had a water line originally that would have been running through the solar site when it was just a cattle pasture, and obviously that was diverted. And the solar company did help us with that cost, and they provided the equipment, labor, and paid for the material as well. So did everything, did a pretty nice job. So still in use today. A little bit about managing sheep in solar farms. I always like to say, if you had a 30-acre pasture, depending on where you are in North Carolina, we could probably walk out there on any given day and just about see every animal, right? And count every one of them, be pretty easy. In a solar array, it's not as easy to find them, especially if you don't have it subdivided with temporary fence. If you're using temporary fence, which I would recommend doing that, you would at least have them in a subsection of that solar site. But they're still a little harder to find. That makes them a little harder to gather unless you've got a good herding dog, which I don't have yet. Always flirting with the idea of getting one. We have just used feed, to kind of what you call tolling, gathering animals that way. And that's worked pretty well. Our sheep are pretty gentle, but as sites get larger, that herding dog would probably be a better option there. Lower stocking rates than typical pastures. At least I thought there was going to be, but I really don't have any data. Again, that was my initial perception of what I thought was going to happen with solar sites. And I do think we have seen some lower stocking rates. To if you take the same pasture, the same forages that's in a traditional pasture, put a solar farm on it, is it going to change the botanical composition and forage production? My mind was yes, so we need to run fewer animals. But what I've actually seen is we're actually producing more forage underneath the panels because of the shading effect, I think. And we're probably producing a little less forage and maybe a different type of forage, maybe more warm season grasses between the rows of panels. So again, my perception on that's kind of changed, and we're working a little bit with Dr. Weaver on a project that'll hopefully give us some data that we can talk about and hopefully get some recommendations and management practices to help us with that. The decisions beyond your control, what I mean there is the mowing. When we basically didn't provide a full service, we were just kind of grazing free grass. I like providing the whole service, be a one-stop shop for the solar company. The solar company personnel, all of them that I've worked with have been really top-notch folks and very professional and really good to work with. So it's been a good relationship. I can't say anything bad about that. A lot of times folks will say how many sheep per acre, and I know Cam he threw some numbers out there, 3 to 5, and use per acre. I'm probably going to be a little more conservative and probably say 1 to 2 to start with, and I think that the difference there probably it could be a regional difference. I mean, if you're starting out with really good soils and really good forages, I think you can hit his number. Unfortunately, in North Carolina, a lot of the farms we run into are not the best scenario and situation. So again, I think both could be right. Just depends on the situation, soil type. How are we going to manage fertility in these sites over a 30-year period? Like things like lime, fertilizer, maybe if some reseeding needs to be done. What type of equipment and methods can that are we going to need to look at? One of the things we have done is we do have this sign here that has our phone numbers on it. And you can see we also have a little entrance here where the solar providers can drive in, open the gate, drive in, then close the gate before they interact with our livestock guardian dogs that are way too over socialized and like people too much. So again, we kind of do some things like that to make it a little easier on the solar personnel, and that's worked out pretty well. Mowing solar farms, wow, I don't even like mowing my yard. I didn't know you could spend that much money on a lawnmower, but you really can. It's interesting that some of the sites we can mow with a 15-foot batwing bush hog, others are zero-turn lawnmowers. Again, it can be a challenge. Make sure you walk the site and see, can you use some larger equipment or are you going to use zero-turn lawnmowers? Just make sure you know what you're getting into because that will affect your cost and your time that you have to deal with. I saw one of the questions early on. I unhid this slide. I think there was a question about how low are those panels? Well, they can be pretty low, and that turned out fine. We did some topical treatment and some antibiotics. Here's what I think happened. If you look at some of the structure here, this is on 2 of the solar farms that we graze are made by this, and Stephen he could talk about the structure and why they might use this type of material. 2 of them are not like this, 2 of them are. And if you rub your hand over any of those metal pieces under there, you'd say, well, there's no way that would cut that sheep's back like that. But I think if you hit it just right, running about 15 miles an hour or ever how fast a sheep can run, you might end up with something that looks like that. So again, that injuries can happen, but I think that's happened about 3 times, 100 ewes grazing, since 2016. So not a huge problem unless it's, one of your favorite ewes and now she's scarred, So just kind of wrapping it up here, I think it's a good deal. When my landlord said we're going to build this first solar farm, I thought it was the worst thing in the world that could happen to us. And I was wrong. It's really changed the way we do things. It's really a nice part of Rogers Cattle Company now. Make sure you talk to the solar company folks, so you don't have the lawnmower showing up and mowing your grass down if you're not providing total vegetative management, which I would prefer that you consider doing that. Grazing sheep and solar farm, it's a good deal. We get electricity, we get animal protein, but we do need to do some more research. Folks like Dr. Weaver, Dr. Maierle, and others need to kind of help us, build better systems to kind of make this, maybe do some modeling to make sure that we are doing what's right, not just from an ecological standpoint, a sustainability standpoint, but also from a business standpoint, make sure we're taking care of ourselves and our families. So we do have some stuff, some information for the Center for Environmental Farming Systems. If you need some more information there, NC State Resources. And I think that wraps me up, Dr. Weaver. So looking forward to the questions. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thank you. Really enjoyed your presentation. And yeah, at this time, we'll open it up to questions. We've got a few in the chat already, so I'll read through those and we can work through what's already in the chat. And then if you have any additional questions, feel free to type them in the chat, or when we get done with these, you can unmute yourself and ask them that way. So there was an initial question on, and this is probably for all three speakers. What are your suggestions to start conversations around contracts and vegetation management with companies?
I think Stephen got into that pretty in depth with his presentation, and just a lot of it is pounding the pavement. That's the biggest question. Do some one-on-one discussion through ASGA with people that are getting started, and the number one question is, how do you get in contact? Like, how do you get your first contract? And to Stephen's point, like, you just got to keep on them and keep looking for the right opportunity. And when that right opportunity shows up, and it may not always show up in your yard right beside you, for most, I mean, Johnny's situation is kind of crazy to look back from someone who never would have done this, and now it's kind of launched them into this thing. But a lot of people will say, like, okay, unless it's right next door, like, I'm not going to pursue this. That's, I think, one of the challenges, looking at it being a real possibility.
I'd echo the same Camren. It's just, for me, I know from my side, it's hard for folks to, navigate some of these larger energy companies and try to figure out who it is to talk to. But just try to find one person in that organization that can get you in touch with the next person. And you're going to have to go down the chain a little bit sometimes, depending on how big this company that you're dealing with is. But eventually, if you try hard enough, you're going to get to the right person. There's somebody out there that wants to talk to you, that wants to learn about grazing and how it's going to make their site a better site. So I would just say, don't get discouraged. Please keep trying, because there's folks out there like me at the other end, kind of saying, "Hey, we need some grazers. Where are they at?" So.
Yeah, I really can't add much to that other than just the patience, being patience and persistence is what I would do. It's interesting to one of the companies we worked with that has two of the farms, they had their own grazing contract that we kind of negotiated back and forth with a little bit. The other solar two farms were built by a company that we initially worked with, and then it went to another company on one of the sides. So it get ready, if you won't be bored. It's going to change quite a bit, but they actually use the ASGA template and put together that contract and kind of got it to their satisfaction. So that's a good resource.
Awesome. So how competitive is the goat industry with sheep when it comes to land management services? And maybe this question was asked specifically related to solar, but maybe goats can provide a different type of vegetation management services when we think about clearing brush and things like that. But what are your all's thoughts on goats?
So on the solar side of things, it tends to pose an issue from climbing on panels, chewing on wires. It's just they've been kind of eliminated early on from being a viable vegetation management option. I think they can work in those other aspects that you were talking about, Andrew. Using them for vegetation management and some more targeted grazing outside of solar, but within the fence, like we're talking about tonight, they've been kind of excluded.
Yeah, you might remember our one of my first slides there talked about the enterprises we've had through the years. We have had meat goats before, but we specifically bought meat goats to eat browse, some brush. And once we got too many goats and we ate all of our brush, then we started having parasite problems and just problems with goats. And then here you have the sheep over here, that we're just doing just fine as grazers. So my point being there is, I think, in a solar side, what we've got are mostly forbs, broadleaf plants and grasses. I think sheep are the animal, to deal with that, the grazing livestock.
So then there's a clarification question on vegetation management, the opportunities in terms of contract revenue on an annual basis, and the answer to that is correct. That number that was utilized, $300 to $500 per acre thereabouts, is an annual number per acre. So we'll just clarify that. What is the standard transport fee to get sheep to and from the job site? How do we know if the grazing area has pesticides?
Yeah, on the transportation cost, I don't know what the stock number is for just what industry rate it, like $4 a loaded mile, or it probably just depends what your trucking company is, but it's going to be different if you're hauling to a site that's 180 miles away or 20 minutes down the road. So that's a challenge. And as we look at utility scale, and I've had a lot of conversations with companies here in Ohio on utility scale being 1,000, 1,200, there's some big sites, 1,000 acres for me to find a spot to put ewes on the home farm. If I can do, when it's up and running, if I can do 3 ewes per acre, 3,000 ewes, I don't have the infrastructure right now to handle that. Can we operate in a more Western model? Because again, we get snow where I'm located at. Can we operate as a Western model, unrolling hay in the wintertime, feeding stored forage? And I'm not looking at a trucking cost other than to market lambs out of that site. But if you're in a say 200-acre site that's close to you and you've got the space to put the sheep in the wintertime, that just goes into your bid, and you factor that into your business model of what are your costs going to be. And the same goes with if you've got to haul water. That's something that we don't always, it's kind of at the back of our mind that if you've done this before and that there's not water on site, it can really be a challenge. It's not impossible, but you do need to make sure that you're planning for that money to haul water, and hauling water's expensive, to come out of that business budget.
Yeah, and make sure you fairly assess that water cost. Don't just think about transportation time for the water either, but also the time to fill those totes and move those totes. How are you filling them with the garden hose, or do you have a higher output water line to get those totes filled? So it can be a significant time investment to move water. So keep that in mind. Any thoughts on the pesticides and how we kind of manage, and it might be come back to a communication deal with the solar company, but any thoughts on that?
I'll just say from my experience, and Johnny, you may have different experiences, but we typically, from my knowledge, don't use a lot of pesticides on our solar site unless we're treating a wasp nest or a bee's nest in a combiner box somewhere. So I think in general, the concern might be more around herbicides, and I'll hand it off to Johnny on that.
Yeah, we have had recently one of the solar sites that's being managed, the O&M provider. Their standard practice was to come in underneath the panels with a broadleaf herbicide. And they asked me, they said, we're scheduled, next week or whatever, next month to do, that solar site that we're grazing. I said, well, I'd rather you not do that. if it's okay. So we again, communication. So I think they were using some glyphosate around some of the inverters and things like that. I said, that's fine. I said, but the broadleaf stuff that you're controlling, a lot of that's sheep feed, so we'd like to control that. And so yeah, and the other thing I would kind of, and I can't talk about a lot because I'm not a weed scientist necessarily, but a lot of these solar sites, or a few of the solar sites I've run into, they use landscaper type herbicides, and some of those may not be cleared, for grazing. So you need to probably make sure you communicate what are you using. Now, some of it's semantics, because I've looked some of them up. I say, okay, here's the landscaper version of this chemical, here's the pasture version of this chemical, and it's the same chemical, it's just a different trade name. So it's just kind of probably goes back to marketing or something like that, but it might be worth having a communication about, or a conversation about that, just to make sure you don't get grazing behind something that might have some type of withdrawal or something, or not cleared for grazing. So just make sure.
Great. Yeah. And then we've got a couple questions here that we got good answers for, and I'll say them real quick just so they're on the recording. But how low to the ground do the panels tip? Do the ewes ever paw or use them as scratch pads? And Stephen mentioned in a comment, the panel edge to ground is typically between 12 and 24 inches. And that relates back to that number we mentioned in terms of like max vegetation height, in terms of vegetation management, is related to that. So they get pretty close, but they're not right on the ground. And then I guess Johnny or Cam, any experience with used pawn or scratching on, rubbing on panels? I guess we could include pilings on that too.
Yeah, I mean, you could tell they do rub on they do rub on them, but I don't think they've done any damage. In fact, the only thing we've had is that injury to those sheep. That is handful of sheep, and again, I don't think that would be from scratching. That's probably just from running and not ducking down underneath the panels. So but we've only had that happen in that one the site that's built a certain way. I've looked at the other panels and just tried to evaluate them, and we've never had any injury in those type of setups. And none of ours are trackers, I should say. They're all the fixed type panels, and our lower edge, like Stephen said, probably the lowest would be 12 inches probably, and then there's some probably up to about 3 or 4 feet, just the way the land kind of lays. So there is some variation depending on the site. And if you're in flat ground, like probably what Cam deals with, it might be more uniform.
Yeah, and the only other thing that I would mention, that it's not all roses. There are some challenges to this, and some issues that have have come up with what they'd call centralized tracking, or like an ATI system is the trade name of what you'd commonly see. And that would operate, simplest way to describe it, operates like a set of Venetian blinds where one main drive line moves all of those panels or rows of panels at the same time. And on that drive shaft, it's basically an exposed like PTO. And so if you're from agriculture, you know that those are dangerous, and there's some rotation that occurs, and there have been some ewes, tends to be wool sheep or sheep that possess wool, or some like Dorper variety sheep that have not shed that top coat, that have been caught up in some of those situations. When you talk to grazers that have seen, you know, some of those systems, the comments kind of like, well, this would never be OSHA approved in a factory, but because it's out in a power plant, it's just fine. And so there are some modifications that have not voided the warranty on those, that putting some drainage tile on that to prevent just that shaft from grabbing onto that fleece and causing damage. But that's really the only situation that has been negative on the rubbing question that you were asking.
There's a question about the permanent fencing around most of these sites, and there's what are the water sources? And I think we covered the water a couple times, and we can certainly discuss that more if there's still questions. But I think we did cover that. And Stephen mentioned in the comments that most solar sites do have an 8-foot chain link or wildlife type fencing on the exterior. So usually that perimeter fence is a pretty good barrier in terms of keeping sheep and guard dogs in. But as Johnny mentioned, you always want to walk that perimeter and make sure that there's no washout areas that might create an escape hole for your animals, or allow predators to get into the site and get to your animals. Is there anything else you all want to add on that?
Only thing I would add, Andrew, I know on one side we walked it, and the chain link fence was pulled up from the ground quite a bit, a foot or so in some places, and the solar company went in and fixed it. I just asked them, I said, hey, this needs to be, and they had their fencing contractor come in and remedied the situation. So again, good to work with. Just have to communicate with them.
So the last question in the chat, there's a lot of references tonight to using ewes for solar grazing. And this individual understands why you maybe wouldn't want to use multiple grown rams on a site, but what about wethers? What opportunity might there be for grazing wethers?
Yeah, from the ram side of things, like if you're keeping sheep out there year round, or if you have sheep out there during the breeding season, no issue running those. I think you probably, again, communication is going to be a pretty consistent theme in the answers, but maybe letting those technicians know that, hey, if you're going to be in this area where we have sheep sectioned off to graze this and control vegetation, there is a male ram in here that just watch your back, or head on a swivel, or try to keep them away from where technicians maybe need to get into. But the weather side of it, it's been done. It certainly could be something to look at from a growing the sheep industry aspect of things. It's a challenge to look at that and say, oh, we need to keep all these wethers out of our food chain and use them to just graze. I think they can be a tool, but when I look at the benefit of that lamb income, that check coming from the enterprise, really gives you an opportunity to grow and pay for labor, pay for employees, pay for yourself to work and raise sheep. And so it'd be something that if the numbers work out, you could pursue it, but it's not growing the industry at the rate that maybe we'd want it to.
Yeah, I guess you just have to work the numbers, Cam, and just see what's the value of that. I mean, if your grazing fee was high enough, maybe it would work out and you needed more mouths, more grazing animals. Maybe it would work out, but my initial gut reaction would be just what you said. I don't think, at a lower grazing fee, I don't think you could do without that income. I just think that would be a budget buster, so.
So there was a comment question on insurance and just the importance of considering insurance costs when bidding a site. Any other thoughts, question or comments, I should say, on insurance?
Yeah, definitely. Oh, go for it, Johnny.
Yeah, I was just going to say, yeah, and there's a lot of variation between what each company would want. We've had some companies that we just needed to kind of beef up our farm policy, and some others that want us to do, workman's comp and much, much higher levels of insurance than what a typical farm operation would deal with. So yeah, start that conversation early and, shop around and make sure you can find a policy that you need.
Yeah, best thing you can do is, like, there's not a stock answer to say, oh, you need this policy and go to this company and purchase it for this price. Every company is going to have maybe something a little bit. Solar company is going to have something a little bit different. Thing that's worked the best for us is finding a broker that you just say, here's our list of demands and we need a quote on what it's going to cost for that policy. Have talked with some people where they're paying $600 annually for their policy, and then another couple, they were faced with a $7,000 policy. It was just the liability, the difference in liability amount. I think the one was like a 1 or 2 million. The other one was like a 5 million. And it's like, they're doing the same job in the same state, but they're doing it for two different companies. And so it's just a matter of getting that information and then building it into your bid and I'd make sure the company knows that, hey, if you didn't require us to do this, this is the excess that we're having to pay for your requirements. And maybe that company's willing to work with you on compensation for that.
So I threw in the chat a link to where you can register for our two remaining webinars. Really excited about the one next month, February 6th. We've got Bill Costanzo with the Texas A&M Livestock Guardian Dog Program that's going to join us. He's an expert on selecting, raising, developing livestock guardian dogs and managing them in combination with small ruminants. So I'm really excited to have him next month. And if you haven't already registered for that one, I encourage you to go ahead and do so. And then our final webinar of this series will be March 6th. And that one will be on pasture management for small ruminants. So a very fitting subject to kind of go along with this one. So we'll give it just another minute here. If you have any last minute questions and want to throw them in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and ask them, we'll give it a minute here. And if not, we'll close things up for the evening. So last chance for questions. Appreciate our three speakers joining us this evening and sharing their thoughts, and really appreciate their insight in this subject area. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for the sheep industry, not only here in North Carolina, but across the United States. And so lots of opportunity to grow and hopefully compete with, imported product and increase the amount of domestic lamb that's being produced here in the US. So there was a question. Let's see here. How do I access the recording? So all of our recordings are posted on our YouTube page. And then I link those to our website. And we will share a link to those as well through email with everyone that is registered. So you should be seeing a recording here in the next week or two with a link for this. And if you don't, just shoot me an email and I'll make sure you get that. And you can find our previous recordings. If you search North Carolina Small Ruminant Improvement Program, it might be under the acronym. It'd be NCSRIP. I know it's kind of a long one there. If you search that on YouTube, you should be able to find our past recordings. They're also on our Small Ruminant Extension webpage. Will you post speakers' contact info? And I know Cam shared his in the chat a little earlier. And I would say if you want to get in contact with one of our speakers, you can, if you email me, that's probably the best way to do it. And then I can get you connected with our speakers if you have some specific questions. It's probably the easiest way to go about that. And I see Adam shared the link for our past webinar. So thanks, Adam. And you can go to follow that link and see the previous 2 webinars that we did on hoof health and goat 101. And this webinar and the remaining 2 will be posted there once we have those edited and up on the web. So I'm not seeing any other questions. So again, appreciate your all's time this evening. Thanks for joining us. Thank you to our speakers. Really appreciate it. Really enjoyed the webinar this evening. And thanks again, and we hope to see you at the next one.